Thank you, Dr. Indrapreeti. Moving on to the plenary session, we have our first speaker for the day on the topic Intercultural Communication and Varying Pragmatics by Dr. R. Roy Whittle. Dr. Roy P. Whittle is an assistant professor of applied linguistics at the Faculty of Language Studies, Sohar University, Oman. His academic credentials include MA in English Literature, B.Ed, Cambridge CELTA, PG CTE. He's also an IELTS train-the-trainer from British Council and MPhil and PhD. He has been associated with professional organizations such as the English Teachers Interaction Forum, the English Scholars Beyond Borders, English Language Teachers Professional Network, and TESOL Oman. He has published several books, chapters, and articles in journals indexed in Scopus and Web of Science. He has also authored a book entitled Changing Paradigms in English Language Teaching and has edited another book entitled An Anthology of Mini Sagas from the Omani Classrooms. Currently, he is on the editorial board of the international journal English Language, Literature and Culture. He has also presented several papers in both national and international ELT conferences and has delivered keynote speeches at some others, including the International ELT Conference organized by VIT, Vellore, and the TESOL Conference organized by TESOL Oman. We are happy to have you with us today, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Aruna, for the great introduction. And thank you also for having me in this conference. Will I be able to upload my slides?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So you can share your screen, sir.
Okay, fine. Yeah. So I think most of the things that I wanted to talk have already been discussed by Dr. Jayaraj John Segar. He has elaborately talked about the relationship between literature, linguistics, culture, language, everything, of course. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your great, insightful plenary session. So thank you also for mentioning Oman in your talk. Of course, you are right in saying that there are a lot of publications coming out from Oman, especially in the area of pedagogy. So let me upload my slides. I hope I will have something like 30 to 40 minutes. Aruna? Will I have something like 30 to 40 minutes for my session?
Yes, sir. 45 minutes. Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Can you see the slides, Aruna? Is it visible to you?
Yes, sir. Now it's visible.
Okay. All right. So as you can see in the title, my session today is on intercultural communication and varying pragmatics. And Dr. Jayaraj has briefly talked about how language is related to pragmatics, linguistics, culture, all those things. So in today's session, I'll be briefly discussing how intercultural communication can affect, pragmatic competence. If you want to have an overview of my session, so we will briefly talk about what actually is meant by pragmatics, and then we will talk about the varying reasons for pragmatics, why pragmatics vary from one culture to another culture, and thus makes communication difficult, if not impossible, at times. And then we will also talk about intelligibility and pragmatics, because when cultures vary, pragmatics naturally vary, and when pragmatics vary, intelligibility can also be affected negatively. So we will look at that aspect as well. And then we will talk about the need to raise awareness of varying pragmatics, because unless you raise our learners' awareness about these varying pragmatics, intercultural communication will become very difficult. Instead of understanding, it can lead to very often misunderstanding and sometimes even to animosity. So there is a total breakdown of communication if we don't have a proper pragmatic competence in addition to communicative competence. And then we will discuss the pedagogical implications of pragmatic competence, and we will also discuss various ways to raise pragmatic competence in our learners. So this is how this presentation has been organized. So before I start on varying pragmatics and intercultural communication, let me show you this picture. So what do you think about this? This is the marked or evaluated paper. A teacher has evaluated a student's answer script, and then this is the mark he has given. So he has put tick for all the answers, but then he has given a big 0. So what do you think about this marking? Do you think the teacher has been fair in evaluating the student's work? Do you think he has given the right mark to the student, or do you think he has made a mistake somewhere? Is there a lapse? Is there, has something gone wrong somewhere? So what do you think? Okay, so when I asked this question to my students in Oman, all of them said, this teacher is like you, because I am very stringent, very miserly perhaps when it comes to giving mark. This is what they accuse me of. In fact, it is not true. So because students thought that it is very unfair to tick all the answers, that because what they understood is all the answers are correct, and how come the teacher has awarded a very big 0 to the student for his or her performance. But the point here is the teacher was not wrong. That paper was marked in Japan, and this is how they mark papers in Japan. So in the Japanese culture, so this is why varying pragmatics becomes important. In the Japanese culture, if you put a tick, it means your answer is wrong. That is the answer. You see, so if you put a tick, it means wrong. And what they do for the right answer, they will put a 0 or a circle. Let us call it a circle, not a 0. They put a 0 against a right answer. So the teacher has done it very properly. It won't create any kind of confusion. It won't create any problem in the Japanese context. But of course, in the Indian context, in the Omani context, it will lead to a lot of chaos. It can even lead to, very fiery arguments and fights, because a student will think that he has got all the answers right, and how come the teacher has marked me wrong? So the point here is, when the systems vary, the meanings can also vary. And unless you are aware of this varying cultural context, especially, today when the world has been so connected, when communities have been, in interaction with each other in an unprecedented way, maybe because of globalization, maybe because of revolution in the field of technology, IT, communication is very easy. You can communicate with anyone from your part of the world, with anyone in any other part of the world. So in that context, unless we have a pragmatic competence, there can be a communication breakdown. Now look at another question here. So my question here is, which of the following problems are right? I have given here 5 problems, 2 plus 2, 4. Of course, I'm sure most of you will agree with me, though there are cases where 1 plus 1 is not always 2. 1 plus 1 need not be always 2, as you know. Of course, that is an area that belongs to critical thinking. In Kerala, there is a very famous writer. Maybe most of you have heard his name. His name is Vaikam Muhammad Bashir. And in one of his novels, Balyakala Sagi. So there is a character called Majid, who of course is the hero. And in his mathematics class, the teacher asks a question to Majid, 1 plus 1, give me the answer. And Majid gives the answer, 1 plus 1 is a bigger one. So he says 1 plus 1 is not 2, rather 1 plus 1 is a bigger one. And he justifies his answer. He says, in my village, I have seen 2 rivers merging. One river comes from the west and another river comes, one river comes from the south and another river comes from the north. And when they merge, they do not make 2 rivers. So 1 plus 1 is not actually always 2. It can also be a bigger one. That is logical thinking. That is perhaps an area in critical thinking. But come back to these problems here. 2 plus 2 makes 4, 5 plus 2 makes 7. Of course, I'm sure most of you will agree with me in saying that number 1, number 2, and number 4 are right. But some of you might disagree with me if I say that number 3 and number 5 are right equations. They have been solved. They have been solved properly. But if you consider, if you think that, if you put that equation or if you put that problem in a different situation, you will have to say that that is also correct in mathematics. So number 3, if you relate that to time, how you calculate time, number 3 and number 5 in relation to calculating time or reading time, these are all right actually, because if it is 12 o'clock now, after 2 hours it becomes 2 o'clock. So if it is 11 o'clock now, 11 p.m. now, after 5 hours it becomes 4 a.m. So what I want to say is simply that when the systems change, meanings can also change. When the systems change, meanings can also change, as you have seen in these equations or in these problems. So we need to look at culture as a system. Culture is actually a system. My culture is what you call a product of the system. So if you look at culture as a system, we have different systems, we have different cultures. And that is why in linguistics, Dr. Jayaraj rightly mentioned, in linguistics, we talk about arbitrariness of meaning. Simply means meaning is never permanent. Meaning is something that is agreed upon. It's a kind of mutual agreement among all the members in a community. Why do we call a chair a chair? As we all know, a chair, if I write CHAIR, you read it as chair, but you know it's not a real chair. It's only something that diagrammatically stands for chair. It is symbolic representation. It is just a symbolic representation. And that is why we say, language is also a kind of symbol. And symbols vary from culture to culture. So meaning is quite arbitrary. If all of us agree that tomorrow onwards, that particular piece of furniture that we call table today can be called chair tomorrow onwards, or why go for tomorrow, right now? If we all agree that when you say chair, what we mean is actually the piece of furniture that we call table today, of course, when I say chair, the picture of table will come to your mind. So this is something that we acquire. This is what you call, in linguistics, there is a theory called symbolic interactionism. You acquire language, language which of course is very closely related to your culture. So when cultures vary, meanings can also vary. So unless you are aware of these varying systems and unless you are aware of these varying meanings, you won't be able to acquire a pragmatic competence. And if we don't have pragmatic competence, communication becomes an absolute failure. Now, I'm sure you have all heard of Braj B. Kacharu. And Kacharu presents the global diffusion of English diagrammatically through these 3 concentric circles. So this has been broadly discussed. Of course, people have adapted these concentric circles in different ways, but this has been, this diagram actually shows how English is used differently. Dr. Jayaraj was talking about English as a foreign language, EFL and ESL. And he also said at least some of us don't know the distinction between EFL and ESL, which of course is true. He has rightly observed the situation in our country. But Kachru has very diligently represented the diffusion, the global spread, the global diffusion of English using the analogy of these three concentric circles. I'm talking about these concentric circles because it is very closely related to varying pragmatics when it comes to the use of English internationally. English, we talk about EFL, ESL. Now we also talk about EIL. EIL means English as an international language. So when it comes to using English as an international language, the pragmatics of English is not the same in all these three circles. That is why I'm talking about Kachru's concentric circles now. If you so he puts, you will find three concentric circles here. One, the inner circle, and then you have the outer circle, and then you have the expanding circle. So Kachru puts all the native speaker countries such as Britain, USA, Australia, Canada, New Zealand. So he places all these countries. Of course, in all these countries, as you know, English is the first language, and these are the native speaker countries. You have people using English as their native language. You have English as the first language. So he places all these countries in the inner circle, and Kachru's argument was, or Kachru said that these are countries that provide the norms to other countries. So he called them norm providing countries. They are norm providers in the sense they are the native speakers of the language, and traditionally the concept was they have the right to decide what should be the right norms when it comes to the use of English. But of course those concepts have changed, and that is why I told you there are people have adapted Kachru's concentric circles. But my point here is only to show the different status of English in different countries. So you have in the inner circle, you have native speaker countries where English is used as the first language. And then you have the outer circle countries, as Dr. Jayaraj mentioned in his plenary session. These were the colonies. These were either the colonies of Britain or they were the colonies of America traditionally. So, for example, countries like India, Pakistan, Singapore, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, all these countries fall into this category, the category of outer circle countries. And in these countries, of course, English is used as a second language. So English is used as a second language means it's not our first language. We have our own mother tongues, but in addition to our own mother tongues, we very much have the presence of English in our countries. It is internally used. It is internally used. So that is where, that is how it becomes different from an expanding circle country. In the outer circle countries, for example, you take the case of India. We have English as the medium of education, at least in the higher educational institutes. We have English in our in our law courts. We have English newspapers. We have books published in India. And of course, if I want to communicate with people from outside my own state, of course, in my own country, if I want to come, I belong to a South Indian state. If I want to communicate with people in the north or people in the west or the east of my country, I of course will have to speak in English. So we have a lot of uses of English internally, that is within the country. So that is why we say we use English as a second language. So all the countries that use English as a second language fall into this category of outer circle countries. And then thirdly, Kachru has the third circle, of course. And thirdly, he talks about expanding circle countries. So these are countries where English is used as a foreign language. To put it into perspective, in these countries, they don't need English for internal use. They don't need English for communicating with their own fellow citizens, their compatriots. They need English only for communicating with people from outside their communities or outside their countries. And that is why we say in these countries, the status of English is that of EFL, or English as a foreign language. Of course, the country where I teach, Oman, all the Gulf countries, even China, of course, is a country, or all these are countries that belong to the expanding circle, because they don't need English for internal use, rather they need it for communicating with people from outside their countries. So as I told you before, inner circle countries are considered as norm providers. Outer circle countries like India, Singapore are norm developers, because we are developing our own norms. That's the point I want to mention here. So when you are developing your own norms, when it comes to using English, you use English differently. Because you don't blindly try to imitate the native speaker. You are not imitating the native speaker norms or the native speaker pragmatics. We even develop our own lexis. So the plenary speaker was talking about lexicographers, and he said the sad situation is that we have only one English lexicographer as of now in our country. Of course, we need more lexicographers, and it is happening in different areas. If you look at literature produced in India, you will find words which are not originally English. And that is why Oxford Dictionary has come out with a supplementary session of Indian English, because lots of words from Indian English have now legitimately crept into what you call even native speaker English now. Many such words like even what you call the mulligatawny, our rasam, which is of course one of our favorites in South India. Mulligatawny is mulligatawny, which of course is rasam, and mulligatawny has become an English word. Ledu has become an English word. Idli has become an English word. Dosa has become an English word. So my point is, pragmatics vary when it comes to language, and pragmatics also vary when it comes to practical use of language, when it comes to culture. So expanding circle countries are norm-dependent countries, because they are not in a position to develop their own norms as of now. Later on, of course, there is a possibility of merging of circles. Countries in the outer circle can move into native speaker countries, and countries in the expanding circle countries might move into outer circle countries. That is what David Gradol says in his book called English Next. So there is a book called English Next, which of course is available on the internet. You can download that. It was a project funded by the British Council. And in that report, David Gradol talks about all these things. But our focus here is about varying pragmatics. What kind of pragmatics do they have in the inner circle countries? What kind of pragmatics do they have in the outer circle countries and in the expanding circle countries? That's what we are going to discuss, of course, in today's presentation. And then how the varying pragmatics can affect intelligibility and can perhaps even lead to communication breakdowns. Okay, so before we come to that point, as we said in our overview, let's also look at what actually is meant by pragmatics. I'm sure all of you know the meaning of pragmatics. So it is a branch of linguistics that deals with language and how we use language. So here language means, of course, we are talking, when you say language here, we mean English language, the English language. So it's a branch of linguistics, and it actually deals with the use of English, how we use English. So do we use English in the same way? Is there a difference between how English is used in the inner circle countries, how English is used in the outer circle countries, and how it is used in the expanding circle countries? And perhaps we can also ask the question, is there a difference between, pragmatics, or is there a difference in pragmatics or in the way English is used even within the native speaker countries? Of course, the answer is yes. We will come to that later on. But as you all know, American English is not the same as British English. First floor is not the first floor in British English and the American English. The word gas is different. So you will find so many differences between American English and British English. Again, Australians won't use English the way it is used either in America or in Britain or in Canada. You will find lots of differences. So this is what we are going to see now, and this is and by discussing all these things, my point is to establish, perhaps, if I can use that word, that it is important to introduce the study of pragmatics, and it is important to develop a pragmatic competence in our learners. So pragmatic competence, so what does that mean? So what does communicative competence, the ability to use language appropriately. That word appropriately is important. You cannot use language the way you want. You should know what should I speak in a particular context. You should know the form that is suitable in a particular context. What vocabulary is suitable in a particular context. Am I to use literary language here? Am I to use academic language here? Which maximum of politeness should I follow here? We talk about the maximum of quantity, the maximum of quality, maximum of manner, which are all these are all things belong to the area of linguistics. So pragmatic competence simply means your ability to understand the illocutionary force of an utterance. So illocutionary force simply means, when you talk about speech acts, we have different speech acts. For example, asking a question is a speech act. Requesting is a speech act. And then commanding is a speech act. Greeting is a speech act. So we have different, asking for pardon is a speech act. So we have different speech acts in any language. So when you talk about speech acts, we talk about locutionary act, we talk about the perlocutionary act, we also talk about the illocutionary act. So illocutionary force simply means, what did the speaker actually mean? Was he asking a question, or was he greeting you? Was he apologizing? Was he requesting something? Was he asking you for a direction? What actually was the purpose of that? That means, are you able to properly decode the code that has been sent by the sender? So because communication is always a process of receiving a code and decoding it appropriately. When I take table, if you don't understand that code, as I told you, it's a symbol. Table is not actually table. It is either a sound. Table is only a sound. It's not a piece of furniture. It stands for a piece of furniture. So if you are not able to decode it properly, so when I say something, if you don't understand the message that I send in the proper way, if you think that I was abusing you when I greeted you, then of course there is communication failure. A greeting should be taken as a greeting. An abuse should be taken as an abuse. An apology should be taken as an apology. A thanksgiving should be taken as a thanksgiving. So that is the illocutionary force. So if you are not able to understand the illocutionary force in a message, that means we don't have pragmatic competence. So pragmatic competence simply means our ability to understand the illocutionary force of an utterance. And now when you talk about pragmatic competence, two things are important. So cross-cultural pragmatics, it is something related to culture, and then inter-language pragmatics. So two things here. One is pragmatics related to culture. It investigates how speech acts are enacted in particular cultures. For example, greeting. How do you greet in your culture, and how do you greet in another culture? Something that is a speech act, that is a greeting in your culture, may not be a greeting in another culture. I will give you some examples later on, and then that will become more clear. It will become clear to you. So that is the cultural aspect of pragmatics. How do people enact How do people perform different speech acts? How do I perform Thanksgiving in my language or in my culture? Not in my language, in my culture. So in my culture, maybe just, a look may be enough to show that I am grateful to you. But if you perform the same speech act in that manner, it may be something very offensive. It may be something highly unacceptable in another culture. So when you talk about pragmatic competence, we need to consider these two aspects. One is pragmatics, closely related to culture, and the other one is pragmatics related to language, interlanguage. Of course, interlanguage is a term used in applied linguistics. So interlanguage means the process of moving from one language to another, the process of acquiring the second language. So the process of moving from, one stage to another stage in your competence or in your fluency, whatever, in your mastery with regard to acquisition of a foreign language or a second language. So in interlanguage, your pragmatics may vary. So when second language speakers use English, you may find people using English differently. Recently, I have been listening to the talks of Sadhguru, and then I found a very good example of interlanguage there. There is the universal question tag. We Indians have the habit of using the universal question tag. Our universal question tag is always, isn't it? So whatever, of course, we know we have different question tags. If it is positive, it has to be negative. If the statement is negative, the tag has to be positive. If you have I, then there is another rule there. But then we Indians very often tend to, not all of us, but we tend to use the universal question tag, isn't it? Maybe there is a cultural significance behind how Indians tend to use the universal question tag. Maybe there is a cultural necessity. Maybe it is the way that has to be used in certain cultures. We will see that later. So the point here is pragmatic simply means, how language is used to enact or to perform a particular speech act. And when it comes to pragmatic competence, we need to consider two areas. One is the area of culture and pragmatics, and the second one is the area of interlanguage and pragmatics. That means the way second language speakers or second language learners, use pragmatics. Now, let me also look at the reasons for varying pragmatics. Why do these pragmatics vary? Why do you have one pragmatics and why do I have one pragmatics? Or can we have a what you can call a universal pragmatics when it comes to English? Is it possible for English to represent all the cultures in the world? Is English capable of that? Or do we have to use English differently? So the question is, do we perform the speech acts in the same way or in different ways? I think we perform speech acts in different ways, and we will see why we perform speech acts in different ways. It is simply because our speech acts are enacted or our speech acts are performed differently because language has got both communicative value and communal value. By communal value, what I mean is it has got a particular value in a particular community. If you use that kind of speech act in the same way, if you perform that speech act, as I told you before, in the same way in another culture, it loses its value, or at least it changes its value. It disfigures itself. It may take different connotations. It may have different cultural nuances. So I will give you a simple example from Oman. It is not connected to language. It is actually connected to culture that we discussed on the previous slides. The Omani coffee is called kahwa, Kahwa. And there is no English equivalent for that. You need to call kahwa because kahwa is different from our coffee. Our coffee and kahwa are not the same. Their ingredients are different. And therefore, they don't call it coffee even in English. If you go to restaurants, you will find on the menu, you will find kahwa and coffee written separately. If you want coffee, of course, our traditional coffee, you have to order for coffee. And kahwa is called, but if at all you want to have an English equivalent, you can call it Arabic coffee. That is what they call it. So after drinking kahwa, they use very small cups for serving kahwa. You know the Arab culture, they sit in a circle and that is how they eat and drink, and the host will be serving you kahwa. So you finish your coffee and you put the cup down. They will again pour a kahwa into that, whether you want it or not. So, okay, you have your second cup and then you place the cup down. They will again pour coffee into that. Doesn't matter how many cups of coffee you consume. The moment you put it down, they will pour coffee into that. If you don't want kahwa anymore, once you are done, if you think it's enough for you, before placing the cup down, before putting your cup down, you have to shake it. You have to shake the cup slightly. If you shake the cup, that means it is enough. So if you don't perform that, it's a kind of, that is why I told you, pragmatics has two elements. One is the cultural element and the other one is the interlanguage element. So this is something cultural. It is not related to, related to language use. It is actually something very closely related to their cultures. So pragmatics has, or language has, both communicative and communal values. Communities are different, and the value that the performance of a speech act has in one particular community may not be the same as the value it has in another community, and that is why we have to perform, or we have to use English differently. We cannot have the native speaker English in our country because our culture is different from the culture of Britain. That is why we go for general GIE. That is what we call it now. They call it British English. We call it GIE. It is AE, BE and GIE, General Indian English, which of course is emerging as a globally accepted English. Okay, so as I mentioned right now, we have different pragmatics because English is not capable. It is mainly because of the inadequacy of English for universal pragmatics. English is not adequate. English is not capable of representing all the cultures in the world. Every language is inseparably, it was mentioned in the plenary session, every language is intertwined. It is inseparably related to the culture of the people that use that language. And just like you cannot separate the dance from the dancer, you cannot separate language from the culture. So our culture is different. So when it comes to India, when it comes to what you call the outer circle countries, you know, we will have a different way of using English. We will have different pragmatics. All right. So these are the reasons. So varying pragmatics even among inner circle countries. As I mentioned before, the pragmatics of using English in America is not the same as the pragmatics of using English in Britain, which of course is another native speaker countries. And then what to speak about the outer circle countries and the expanding circle countries. So socio-linguistic and pragmatic transfers to English. So you have socio-linguistics, things that come from culture, as we talked when we talked about communicative and communal values. There are elements of pragmatics that creep into the way we use English from cultural sources and also from linguistic sources. All right. So now this is what Soyinka said about, you know, the need to change our pragmatics, the need, why we need to move away from native speakerism. You know, this is what Soyinka says. Native speakerism is a linguistic blade. So he calls it a linguistic blade. If you use English the way it is used in America, or the way it is, this is what they want actually. I think of course, I keep going back to the plenary speaker because he mentioned all these points. It is $1 million business, mind you. ELT is it can be more than $1 million. It is a big business in all these countries, English language teaching. So native speakers actually want to, maybe not all of them, There are people like Jennifer Jenkins. There are many people. I mean, there are people who also accept. There are people who eulogize, people who say that varieties of English are legitimate varieties of English. Nobody wants English now. There is a big question regarding the ownership of English, whose language actually is English. And that is why we talk about EIL now, English as an international language. So Soyinka says, native speakerism is a linguistic blade in the hands of the traditional cultural castrator. Oh, he is using sharp words, too pungent. Of course, these are not my words. Don't be offended. These are the words used by Soyinka. So these are people who traditionally want to castrate us culturally, which the black people, he uses black people because he wrote it in the African context, Soyinka, Achebe, you know, all these people. So which the black people have bent and twisted. So this is the point I want to highlight. That is why I have highlighted those words in red. So we need to bend and twist English. Why do we have to bend and twist English? To carve new concepts, because you want to carve your new concepts. Traditionally, English was taught so that we know the English culture. But now it's a time when colonies are writing back. We use English not only to know the culture of the native speaker countries, we also use English to represent our culture. So when we use English to represent or to present our culture to the rest of the world, we need to carve new concepts into the white flesh of supremacy. So here Soyinka is talking about the need for varying pragmatics, or why we cannot use. So he says the question is not whether I am capable of using native speaker English, but the point is I shouldn't, because I use English to carve not your concepts. I use English to present my concept, to present my culture. My concepts are different, my culture is also different, and therefore naturally, you know, by default, my pragmatics also will be different, my English also will be different. And this is what Achebe says, same thing about pragmatics, about the need to nativize English. I feel that the English language will be capable to carry the weight of my African experience. Yes, English is capable. I can use English to present my African experience. In our context, like Raja Rao, you know, Kandapura. If you read Kandapura, you will see how Raja Rao has bended and twisted, you know, English, how he has Indianized. Read R.K. Narayan, Salman Rushdie. You will find all Arundhati Roy. You will find the way people, you know, bend and twist the English language because they need to use, you know, English in a different way. But it will have to be a different English. That is what Achebe says. Yes, I can use English, but not the same English used by the native speakers. A different English, of course, not totally separated from them, but still in communion with its ancestral home, the inner circle countries, but altered, changed to suit its new African surroundings. So we need to alter. We are forced to alter because the surroundings are different. So now let us talk about how pragmatics affect intelligibility. I hope I still have a few more minutes. Okay. So pragmatics and intelligibility. Okay, thank you. Pragmatics and intelligibility, you know, non-verbal. That means we talked about the cultural aspects of pragmatics, and we also talked about the linguistic aspects of pragmatics. This is something that falls into the cultural aspect of pragmatics. And maybe you have read this, or you have heard about this, the experience of George Bush the Senior, not the second one. George Bush the Senior in Australia. What happened to George Bush the Senior in Australia? He was addressing a group of journalists, and when he was about to finish his press conference, he showed the V for victory sign. The V for victory sign, but he showed it the other way around. The V for victory sign, you know, the back of the palm to the audience, and he showed the V for the victory sign. Of course, he thought everybody is happy. He was trying to please them. He was trying to make them happy, like our thumbs up or showing the V for victory sign. But in the Australian culture, that V signal has a very negative, a very abusive connotation. It is something like lifting the middle finger in the American culture. We didn't have that in our culture, but because of the American movies, of course, people are using it in our culture also. The abusive expression of lifting the middle finger in the American culture. It's the same as, this gesture had the same meaning to the Australians, and they were all highly offended. You can just imagine what it would mean. George Bush the Senior, the President of America, is showing that gesture to, a dignified group of people. The journalists there are all journalists, dignified, I don't know, but a group of journalists in Australia. So finally, he had to apologize because they were agitated, they were angry. So this is what happens if you don't have pragmatic competence. So looking into someone's eyes, in the Indian context, we say if you can't look into someone's eyes and speak, you are considered a liar. People say, oh, you are lying to me because you don't dare look into my face. But in American culture, if you look into someone's eyes and speak, it's like you are challenging them. It is an abusive, signal there, that abusive gesture there. So these are all areas of pragmatics related to culture. And we need to make our learners aware of these varying pragmatics so that they don't fail in communication, at least when they communicate with people from other communities. So initiating handshake, there is a norm in several, I think in Britain, who will initiate a handshake? That means who will first offer the hand to the other person. In the Omani culture, anybody can shake hand with anyone, doesn't matter. If a small child can shake hand with our Sultan, so any minister in the country, it's a very common practice. By the way, to mention that incidentally, Oman is a country of profound greetings. If you say Assalamu alaikum to somebody, then he will say Assalamu alaikum back to you, and then he will have, something like 15 to 20 questions to ask. So he will ask you, kif inde, kif inda aila, kif halak. If you are a woman, they will ask kif halish. If you are two people, they will say kif halkom. They have different ways of greeting, and they have a set of questions. They will ask you about the well-being, not only about your well-being, about the well-being of your wife, about the well-being of your children. It can even go down to questions regarding the well-being of if you have a camel, your pets in the house. Of course, they don't keep pets, but the other animals that you keep. So, pragmatics vary. And if you are a newcomer here, you will be shocked to hear people asking you these questions. So, who will initiate a handshake in the British culture? I think in the European culture, in the whole of Europe, the superior person, someone who is superior to you, has to offer the hand first. So he has to, or she has to initiate the handshake, not you. If you think you are inferior, in position, in your office, in your job, meaning a professor has to offer his hand to a student, not the other way around. So these are elements related to culture. Now, we also have verbal, which of course related to the way we use language, cultural elements. I told you about shaking the cup after drinking kakwa, greeting, all those things. Okay, so now let's have a few examples of non-lexical or paralinguistic aspects. The importance of how something is said. It is very important how you say something. In some cultures, something that is important is spoken loudly. So what is spoken loudly is taken as the important point, but it's the other way around in many other cultures. What is important is spoken softly in some cultures. So how you speak, the intonation, your tone, these are all important when it comes to what you call linguistic aspects of pragmatics. So emphasizing the sentence before the main point. You know, in some cultures, they emphasize the sentence before they mention the main point, and the main point is spoken very softly. But in some other cultures, the main point itself is spoken very loudly. So if you are not aware of these varying pragmatics, you will misunderstand or you will mistake the main point. What is not important may be taken as the important point, and what was important may be taken as the less important point. All right, so speaking loudly, speaking softly, all those things. So I told you about Arabic greetings. Arabic greeting, they will have different questions to ask. They will have a set of questions. And now look at the use of Mr. Look at the use of all these words, Mr. I think in our culture, we often use Mr. with the first name. But in the native speaker countries, they always use Mr. with the last name. But in our culture, perhaps we cannot use, it's a cultural necessity. That is why our pragmatics vary. Maybe we are not in a position to use Mr. with the last name. For example, in many cultures in India, the last name is, of course, the name of your caste, the caste that you belong to. And in many states, you know, if you call people by their caste name, you can be jailed because it is an offense, especially if you belong to a backward caste or a, of course, I don't know why we call caste backward, but constitutionally speaking, if you call someone by the name of his or her caste or their caste, it can be taken as an abusive use. But in native speaker norms, in standard native speaker standard English, Mr. always goes with the last name. But in many cultures, you cannot use that. In the Omani culture, the last name is always like we have caste in our country. In the Omani culture, they have tribes. So the last name is always the name of the tribe. Not all people like to be addressed by the names of their tribes, you see. So we need to change the pragmatics. Now look at these words, uncle. My son calls, or my children call everyone. All elderly people are uncles to us. But in the British culture, they don't have that practice. My children address my friend as uncle. But then in the native speaker country, they may take the use of uncle in its real meaning. Auntie, our housemates are addressed as aunties by our children. Sister, we call a nurse a sister. So language also varies, pragmatics vary. So another use of language in the Indian context, I would say in the Asian context, is minimizing self-praise and maximizing the praise of the other. We always present ourselves as humble people. I am reminded of Uriah Heep, if you remember that story. Okay, so minimizing self-praise. You minimize yourself. When someone comes to your house, you say, oh, I am so happy that you were humble enough to come to my humble hut. Maybe you live in a bungalow, you live in a palatial building, but you will present yourself as someone living in a humble hut. I am honored now because you visited my humble hut. So you minimize self-praise and you maximize the praise of the other. So these are varying speech acts, which may not be there, which of course is not there in all the cultures. You know, when someone comes to our house, we say, come, 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 come. So unless we say many comes, you know, it is like an unpleasant welcome. When someone comes to your house, if you simply say, okay, come, it's not taken as, you know, it is not taken as a proper welcome. You have to say, oh, come, come, come. So then only the guest feels that he is or she is honestly or sincerely welcomed, which of course is not there in the British culture. In the Arabic culture, you have multiple versions of speech acts. You know, for example, if they want to congratulate, they will say, in Oman, they will say, Elf Mabruk. Elf means 1,000. Mabruk means congratulations. 1,000 congratulations, if you translate that literally. So some of my students here, they also they translate this. So this is interlanguage. Because they say Elf Mabruk, Elf 1,000 congratulations. They speak also like that. They write also like that. Elf Salamat. Salamat is speedy recovery. Elf Salamat. I wish you 1,000 speedy recoveries. If you want to recover 1,000 times, the implication is you also have to fall sick 1,000 times. Okay, but this is the way they greet people. So speech acts also vary. Indian over politeness, we say, kindly advise me please. I respectfully submit the following few lines for favor of your kind consideration. This is the way, this is an element of Indian English, because we are over polite. And I forgot who said, one writer says, Indians cannot do away with the gods even in their writings. When we write letters, we always say, in the name of Ram, in the name of Jesus, in the name of this Lord or that God, I greet you. So we cannot do away with the gods even in our writings. Cultural element. With due respect, I beg to inform you, which of course is not an acceptable use in the British English, but it is because of, this is a cultural intrusion presented in language because of the Indian, what you call, habit of over politeness. And there is another significant thing, Japanese, yes. My PhD supervisor, Professor Sedan Patil, was a teacher in Japan for something like 4 years. He's a teacher from FLU, and then he was there on deputation. And this is what I learned from him. You know, when a Japanese says yes, it is not always an yes. You know, they are so polite that they can't say no to you. When suppose you go to there as a company executive and you want to get a deal done or a contract signed, they might tell you yes, but that offer will never come to your office once you come back to India. The problem is they have, not the problem, this is the way they say. That is what is acceptable. That is the communal value. That is why we talked about the communal value of language use, of pragmatics. In the Japanese culture, they say yes to everything, but there are different intonations. There are different ways of telling yes, which I am not very thorough with, but depending on the way they say yes, you should understand whether it is a no yes or an yes yes. So the Japanese way of saying yes. Now, I couldn't agree with you more. Most Chinese speakers of English, you know, take this expression as a negative, expression or a sign of disagreement. Universal question tag, which I talked about before, that is again, maybe there is a cultural element there also. For example, when I say, or if I say, you broke the window, didn't you? You broke the window, didn't you? That means it is like I am imposing the blame on you. Didn't you? That means I am almost sure that you broke the window. But when you say you broke the window, isn't it? It's very neutral. There is no imposition. So there is an element of what you call the Indian over politeness, reflected even in that universal question tag. Another Indian English usage is mutual alliance. You open today's newspaper, you will find in the matrimonial column this expression, proposals invited from parents for mutual alliance. I asked one of my native speaker colleague what he understands by this expression, and he told me it looks like it's a kind of some kind of collaboration between two firms. I said, yes, in a way you are right. It's a kind of collaboration. It's a kind of business deal between two firms. But you know what it means in the Indian context. My son will marry your daughter and your son should marry my daughter. It's a kind of exchange. So this is not there in other cultures. This is something typical of our culture, and we have to come out with a new expression for that. And we use the word mutual alliance for that. That becomes a cultural necessity. People may blame us saying that we are moving away from the native speaker norms, but the point is we are not. This is a cultural necessity. The world gig of circumlocution. We speak things in a roundabout way. I think I have exceeded my time. Have I?
Yes, sir, another 3 minutes, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to wind up.
Yes.
So we also speak, in a roundabout way. Like I pray you suppress your word instantaneous outrage of merriment, because Indians have the feeling that we have to use bombastic words. We speak not to communicate but to impress. So this is one of the accusations against the way we use English. We are speaking not to communicate, but we speak so that we can impress the audience. Instead of simply saying, will you please stop laughing, we might say, I pray you suppress your instantaneous outrage of merriment. And this is something you have all heard, exasperating farrago of distortions, misrepresentations, and outright lies being broadcast by an unprincipled showman masquerading as a journalist. So Shashi Tharoor, so this is one of his, I mean, this is, all of you are very familiar with this. And then you see the way people have used. Now let us see how we can familiarize, to come to the practical aspect, applied linguistics, how we can familiarize our learners with varying pragmatics. So one activity perhaps we can give our students is, we can ask them to compare the performance of speech acts in their first language with the performance of the same speech act in the target language. How do you do one speech act in your language, and how do other people do the same speech act in the other languages? For example, how are you? So in my language, I speak Malayalam, that is my first language. So, or in any language, how are you? If you ask in English, how are you? Is it a real question or is it a greeting? Of course, it's a greeting. When I ask how are you to a person, if you don't get the illocutionary force of this speech act, this is what I talked about in the beginning. This, of course, is a greeting. If you don't take it as a greeting, if you take it as a real question, and if you start answering, oh, yesterday I got some headache, fever, I went for RT-PCR, everything. If you start discussing like that, it means you haven't got the illocutionary force of my greeting. You haven't taken it as a greeting. And hello is also a greeting. But in the Hungarian culture, I'm going to wind up now. In the Hungarian culture, these are hello. Hello, we use hello when we want to open a talk. When you want to open a conversation, we say it at the beginning. But in the Hungarian culture, they say hello at the end. So for them, hello is like goodbye. So our goodbye is their hello, you see. So varying pragmatic. So we can ask them to identify, or we can ask them to compare, these different speech acts. So I have many other examples which can be given to students. I have just given you one such example. So another example, okay, so how people perform speech acts in their culture and how the same speech act is performed in our culture. In Malayalam, if you say, where are you going? In the Dravidian language, Malayalam, this is a greeting, not a question. Where are you going? Engota. We say that in Malayalam. It is simply a greeting. We don't expect him to say where actually he is going to. So if you take it as a real question, then of course you miss the illocutionary force. So we can ask them to compare all these things. This is another expression from Arabic. And let me wind up now by saying hello in the Hungarian way. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that interesting session. We are grateful for the time and effort you had actually taken to share your thoughts and experiences with us. And I think the slides that you had shown us really gave us a close look at all the land, the culture, and the people, and we couldn't have gained it in any other way. I hope all the participants enjoyed your session as